What is going on, everybody? I am back today because, as I said it a couple of videos ago, it's September, we're getting closer to October, and I always get amped up for the season by watching horror films, and I love watching my old favorites, but I like to try to spend September and October finding some new horror films or some new gems that people really appreciate. And the film I'm going to be discussing today is rather unique in the fact that it's called The Third Saturday in October Part 5, but it's technically the first film from this director. This director had an idea to make a film that was meant to be viewed as the fifth installment in this horror franchise and try to aesthetically make it look like a film in the 90s that was a sequel to this long-standing slasher franchise. That's really interesting to me because a lot of the reviews I read early on talked about how it pays homage, but it's also sort of a satire on slasher films. And so knowing that the film is going to be a critique and also an homage, it's interesting to how it's going to look visually, the way the performances are going to come across, and I love sort of meta movies like that. So I was really excited to watch this film, and the movie I'm going to be talking about today is The Third Saturday in October Part 5. The Third Saturday in October Part 5 is directed by Jay Burleson. It's Part 5. Unstoppable killer Jack Harding is back in town after 7 years as he stalks and kills at random before chancing upon a football watch party. The game is, of course, between long-standing rivals, the Alabama Mobile Seahawks and the Tennessee A&M Commonwealth. Chaos ensues in an increasingly ridiculous fashion with inventive murders and multiple love triangles. Hearts are broken and appendages are torn. So I was very excited to watch this movie because it's this meta slasher film that's the first film they've shot, but is technically the fifth installment in this long-standing horror franchise. And I have very weird feelings about this movie because I really appreciate it aesthetically and visually, but it's a really bad movie. It's difficult when you have that type of conflicted feelings because you watch something and you hope that something like this is something you're really going to appreciate, but it's incredibly lackluster in virtually every way outside of being visually pleasing. So obviously, this being the fifth installment in a franchise, this slasher icon has already existed, so the only thing we know about him is what we're given at the beginning of the movie. He comes and kills people on the third Saturday in October around this giant rivalry football game, and we're introduced to this large cast of characters, which are all these teenagers from this high school that are coming together for a football watch party. The main two that we follow is a young girl who is being babysat by this other girl. The babysitter comes, picks the girl up from her parents' house, and the killer shows up at the parents' house and then starts working his way through the town, killing off people one by one. And like I said, before I say anything negative about the film, visually, this movie is stunning. It looks just like a slasher film out of the 1990s. The framing, the color palettes, everything about it, it's visually remarkable. They did a fantastic job creating this atmosphere of this time of year. It feels like fall, it feels like a Halloween movie, and I was enamored with a lot of shots in the movie. I was really impressed with the visual style, and I think that they did an amazing job making a film that pays homage to that era of film visually. But aside from visually, the movie is so throwaway. First off, if this is going to be an homage to a slasher film while also being kind of a satire on a slasher film, you have to have humor that works. The humor in this film is not funny. It's very forced, and most of it feels like an inside joke between people working on the movie. There's this reoccurring gag in this film about this cat poster that comes up. I'm not sure if they thought that just the absurdity of it was going to make it funny, but it really doesn't work whatsoever. And then they introduce all these characters that are supposed to feel like they have quirks of characters from like Friday the 13th. And when you're playing into caricatures like that, it should come off as really funny, but none of them have any personality. And I think it's in part to the performances aren't all that great. I kept getting pulled out of the film because I found the acting to be really miserable. And when you watch slasher films from that era, not all of the performances performances are great, but the people understand their roles enough and play into them well to where they're fun to watch. I mean, even I think of like Friday the 13th Part 5, for instance. Every character in that movie has some unique attribute that makes them interesting and fun to watch, whether that be the banter, like they have the girl in Friday the 13th Part 5 that's constantly dancing with her headphones on, and just that being a part of her personality comes through in a way that's really funny, and the way that it's framed, the comedic timing of her death in the film, all of those things are paced out really well, and you're immersed in the story and you're interested and engaged. The problem is when you're watching the 5th installment in a franchise that you're already supposed to know about, that's technically already existed even though none of the other films have been shot, you should have some kind of establishing thing that gets us in the mood and ready to watch the film. I think of all the great slasher sequels and how you know these characters and they're already established, but there's a scene at the beginning that kind of gives you an idea of what you're working with. And I feel like the establishment scene for this slasher isn't all that interesting. And I really didn't have any point during the movie where I was all that interested in learning more about him. He doesn't really have a looming or menacing presence, which is unfortunate because I think the design with him wearing the mask was really interesting. I liked that. I thought it was cool, but his character doesn't have any menacing presence. And this thing has an amazing soundtrack. I loved the soundtrack. I felt like it played really well through the movie, but it has no suspense, no unsettling anxiety towards the kill sequences. It's just like you have these really flat, bland moments of dialogue that end up turning into a scary sequence. Even like the slasher films of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, even if they had moments that were a little less engaging, there's always something keeping you on the edge of your seat, something in the back of your head that gives you the idea that you are watching a horror film. There were multiple moments throughout this movie that I forgot I was watching a horror movie. And that's incredibly unfortunate because I kept seeing the passion in each individual frame of how much this person clearly loves the genre and how much effort they put into visually recreating it. And I like the setting of the town. I think that the idea that it takes place around this college football game is really funny. As someone who grew up in a small town, things like that, the football rivalries, they're hilarious to me. I love it. I thought that was so perfect. But when everything else in your film is so throwaway, even the kill sequences, like there were a couple moments I enjoyed, but most of them were so forgettable. And if it's gonna be a slasher film that you're trying to copy and paste, you have to give me something with the kill sequences that are memorable. Most of them were a person walked in a room and they got killed off and it cut to the next sequence. And even in Halloween, every kill in Halloween, in the first Halloween film, even shit in the second Halloween film, they're memorable. You remember them because of how well thought out they were. In this movie, if you're going to recreate that vibe and that atmosphere, give me something I'm going to remember. And this just really disappointed me overall. I kept hoping that it was going to get better throughout the runtime, and it just got worse and worse to where by about the halfway point, it became such a slog. I was just ready for it to be over. And they did end up making the first installment in this that's technically the sequel that you're supposed to watch after this movie. So I am going to watch that movie in hopes that it gets better. I want to complete it. I want to watch it and see if it does get any better. But I would not recommend watching this movie. I don't think it's really worth it unless you want to see the aesthetics of recreating this type of film. But I would recommend go watching anything in Ty West's catalog over this, where Ty West not only recreates that atmosphere but actually writes really great movies. So have you seen The Third Saturday in October Part 5? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was terrible. Aside from the visuals, everything else in this movie was incredibly throwaway, and it's unfortunate because in theory, this should be something I really love. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.